everybody, welcome back. Does anything ever just crack you up? Well, I was online the other day and I was reading this story about a Navy P-8A Poseidon. It's a maritime patrol and reconnaissance aircraft, or I believe it's the military version of the 737-800 with a bunch of fancy equipment on it. Well, it overshot the runway, landing at the Marine Corps Air Station, Oahu Bay, on the island of Oahu. It went right into the water and apparently it got hung up on a reef. There were 9 crew members, everybody got off safely, so we can laugh a little bit. It was named Poseidon. But that's not the part that really cracked me up. The part that had me laughing was, as I'm reading this article, and then another one, and then another one, I come to find out that the aircraft, this military aircraft, the reason why it crashed was because it had an all-female crew. Of course, the military wrecks an airplane, it's because of diversity. It's because every single crew member, all 9, were all women. All right, if you haven't caught on, it was not an all-female crew, but that was a pretty funny conspiracy theory. So now that it has my attention, I'm thinking, all right, it's actually not a bad topic to talk about. Runway excursions, overshooting a runway, or as the military likes to call it, an overrun. So yeah, you know what? Now that it's got my attention, let's talk about this. Okay, so what happened here? Well, this was a military aircraft and the Navy's gonna do their own investigation, and I don't know about you, but Navy's not talking to me. So I don't know, what all the facts are, and probably we'll never know. But you know what? Let's look at what we do know. All right, so the aircraft is coming in. It looks like they had about a mile of visibility in either light rain or mist, depending on what report you're looking at. Okay, so that means that the runway was not dry. All right, no biggie there. Looking at the winds though, so if you look at the wind report from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, and this flight landed at 1:59 in the afternoon, the wind shifted from 0 to 21 knots. And it looks like that was a 21 knot tailwind on this aircraft. That could be a biggie, right? It looks to me like if this aircraft had done all their flight planning, calculated their numbers, their briefing, everything based on the wrong winds, that could have led to an unstabilized approach. Okay, so what's an unstabilized approach? Let's look at the parameters for that. So by 1,000 feet IMC and 500 feet VMC, very specific criteria must be met. You want to be VREF no more than VREF plus 20, rate of descent about 700 feet per minute, not to exceed 1,000 feet per minute, be in the landing configuration, flaps, slats, and gear extended. You want to be stable on all 3 axes, and if you're IMC, that's no more than a dot deviation from glide slope localizer, and you want your engine thrust stable above flight idle. That's in the event that you have to go around, your engines are already spooled up. And you want your checklist all complete to confirm that all the above parameters have been met. Now, this 1,000 feet, 500 foot, this list here, that is your litmus test. You have to meet every single one of these items 100%. You can't fudge this, or you're required to go around, period. You can go around before this, but if you reach 1,000 feet or 500 feet and you're outside of any of these parameters, you're out of there. So, all right, let's go back and look at this flight. Okay, I'd like to say one more time, I have no inside information on this accident. I do not know what happened to them. For all I know, they could have had a catastrophic mechanical failure that set them off the end of the runway. I don't know. But for learning purposes, I'm going to assume that was not the case. Now, according to eyewitnesses, this aircraft came in and they landed high and fast. It sounds to me like a tailwind got them. Now, what's a tailwind gonna do? Well, it's gonna increase your ground speed. It's gonna make it a lot harder to land at the touchdown zone, 1,000 feet or no later than 3,000 feet down the runway. and it's gonna increase the landing distance. Depending on when the winds picked up, it also would affect their approach, right? So if they had a tailwind on their final, it's gonna increase their vertical speed, it's gonna increase their descent path. Now, I don't know what winds they were given, I don't know what data they planned on, but I will say in this cockpit on the primary flight display, they do have dynamic wind information. They have an arrow that shows you beautifully where the wind is coming from, the direction and the speed relative to you. And that information is really good information. It's updated, I believe, 8 times per second. So if you plan, you know, if the winds for one thing and then that shifts or that changes, you have to change your plan along with that. I don't know. I don't know if that happened or not. Again, I don't know. But a wind shift definitely would have created an unstabilized approach for this aircraft. And it looks like an unstabilized approach led to this hot, fast landing that pushed them off the end of the runway. Okay, so let's look at an accident where we do know exactly what happened. Pakistan Flight 8303 was an Airbus, an A320, flying from Lahore to Karachi in Pakistan. It crashed after flying a very erratic, unstabilized approach. 97 people died in this accident. All right, so let's look at this. Everything on this flight started out perfect. It was a beautiful day, sunny, clear skies, crew was well rested, aircraft was in perfect condition. But for some reason, right from the start, the pilots, they just weren't exercising SOP in the cockpit. They were missing checklists, they were missing call-outs, including call-outs for deviations from SOP. And there was just no CRM being exercised. All right, they were coming into Karachi and they were assigned a star arrival, pretty standard, a standard terminal arrival route for runway 25 left. For some reason, they were very late in starting their descent. Now, according to the cockpit voice recorder, apparently there was an avid conversation going on in the cockpit about COVID. Maybe that distraction, you know, got them behind the airplane. But they finally started down and they were very, very high. So what did they do to catch up on the profile? Well, they turned the autopilot off, they threw out the speed brakes, and they threw the gear out. The gear is a big anchor. All right, so the pilots began the game of catch up. They're allowed to do that, right? They don't have to be stabilized until the last 1,000 feet, or I'll give them 500 feet here because they were in visual conditions, but boy, they were behind. At one point, they had a vertical descent path of 7,000 feet per minute down. They were super high. They were too fast to configure to get the flaps and slats out. You can't put the cart before the horse here. You have to slow the aircraft down before you can configure. And then, for some reason, they raised the gear. Perhaps because they had a bunch of bells and whistles going off in the cockpit because they were overspeeding them. I don't know, but now they're coming in clean and the gear is up. The controller sees this. He did give him a heads up a few times, but the pilots, they just weren't biting. Finally, at about 5 miles out, the controller notes that they are at 4,000 feet, and on the profile, on a 3-degree, glide path there, they should have been at this point at 1,680 feet. So the controller, he threw him a bone. He gave him 180-degree heading so that they could orbit, as they say over there. That's just vectors to, come back and circle around. And he was giving the pilots a chance to collect themselves, slow down, get down, configure, but the pilots weren't biting. They're like, nope, we got the glide slope, 25 left, we're continuing. Well, it is the pilot's call, right? Not the controller's. Controller tried, and so they continued on.
Low, gear, too low, gear,
40,
too low, gear,
30,
too low, gear, too low, gear,
20,
too low,
retard,
gear,
retard.
too low.
Yeah, they continued for 25 left. I think they missed every single item for a stabilized approach, but they just kept going. They kept going until they flew right into the pavement with no gear. Both the engines impacted the runway about 4,500 feet down, bounced, and then they came back down, impacted the engines a second time, another 1,000 feet down the runway. Now at this point, the captain did hit toga. He went max blast, tried to climb out, but the damage to the engines was just too severe. Both engines failed and this aircraft crashed into the city. One small contributing factor, the local controller who cleared them to land did not notice that the gear was up. All right, so they went to the city, took out a lot of people, and yeah, that was how that unstabilized approach ended. Next, I want to look at American Flight 965. This was the 757 that flew from Miami down to Cali, Columbia, and flew into the terrain on arrival. Now, hear me out on this. I know this flight was classified as a CFIT, controlled flight into terrain. I know it was a navigational error, but how did they get into that situation to begin with? Well, looking at ALPA's criteria to prevent unstabilized approaches, and something that's a big part of our flight training, to prevent an unstabilized approach, you have to decline late changes of landing runway when approach stabilization would become marginal or impossible. All right, so this flight, the captain of this flight had been to Cali Columbia a handful of times. The first officer had never been there in his life. They both were very qualified pilots. They both had good records. They both were ex-military. How did they get into a situation where they flew into the terrain? All right, let's look at this. They were coming into Cali. They were flying south. They were told to expect runway 1, which would be a north landing, which is the only runway this captain had ever landed on. And obviously the first officer had never been there, so he was also unfamiliar. It was dark. The flight was 2 hours late. It was a very late flight to begin with, and they're tired. They're coming into land into Cali, and the controller, doing them a favor, offered them straight in for runway 19, which would be the opposite direction that they had planned for, briefed for, had all their charts out for, and were completely prepared for. The controller, when he gave them this, believed that they were north of the VOR Tallulah. They actually were south of the VOR. The controllers down there have no radar. Apparently they had radar, but years earlier, a terrorist attack had blown out the radar and it was never replaced. So the pilots were completely on their own here. Now, Cali is in a valley. It's surrounded by high terrain, by mountains on all sides. And there's no light on the ground. So it's a dark hole. So these pilots are coming in, they're on their own, they have no guidance from ATC, and suddenly, really too late in the game, the controller says, do you want to straight in? Well, I mean, how do you say no to that, right? It's like, sure, it's late, we're tired, it'll save us some time, we'll take the straight in. So they accepted it. Now, the first thing the captain did was he immediately said to the controller, oh, we need to get down, because in the blink of an eye, they went from saving time to not having enough time. They were already high and fast for this straight in approach. But they thought, we could do it. We can do it. We have until 1,000 feet, right? Until we have to be stabilized. They threw out the speed brakes. Well, the controller cleared them to fly direct to Roseau, which is an NDB. The captain types in Roseau into his FMS. Well, he typed in the letter R. Well, when he typed in the letter R, I think 10 fixes came up. And per our training and per the software parameters, the one closest to you should be the one at the top. And so the captain selected the first Roso. And he skipped a couple of SOPs here. He put it in and he hit execute, and he didn't check his map first to see exactly where that magenta line was going to bring him. And also, he didn't have the first officer confirm it before executing it. The aircraft went into a left bank because it was going to the wrong fix. It had the same frequency and the same identifier, but it was not the one that was directly in front of them, which I'll just throw in a gee whiz here. I believe American did sue Honeywell and Jeppesen for this software glitch. So it was a navigational error and there were a lot of extenuating circumstances, but they were in such a state of mind trying to play catch up because they were high and fast and they had the speed brakes out. They just didn't notice that the aircraft had started a gradual bank to the left. Well, I think it was 87 seconds after being given that clearance direct Roso, the aircraft turned and flew into the terrain. Just a little side note here, or gee whiz for you. There were 5 survivors on this crash. All 5 of those people were seated over the wings, which structurally is the strongest part of the fuselage and conveniently located right next to the emergency exits. Just saying. Yes, this was a navigational error, but this was going to be an unstabilized approach. It was the precursors to an unstabilized approach. There's no way they were going to make that runway at this point. There's no way that 1,000 feet they were going to be within all of their parameters. They accepted something that led them down the garden path, and it was very tragic. It was very tragic. So the Aeronautica Civil Board determined that the probable cause, among other reasons, was the failure of the flight crew to discontinue the approach into Cali despite numerous cues alerting them of the inadvisability of continuing the approach during a critical phase of flight. And also contributing was the flight crew's ongoing efforts to expedite their approach and landing in order to avoid potential delays. Well, those items also happen to be on the list of criteria for an unstabilized approach. These pilots, they had their ducks in a row for runway 1. They were all set up. They were briefed, they were prepared, they had all their charts out. Everything was perfect, in alignment, programmed for runway 1. The controller is trying to do them a favor. Gave them a shortcut, gave them a straight in. Gosh, that is hard to resist. But you know what? In this case, it was just too late. If nothing else, it would have been near impossible for them to have met all their criteria for a stabilized approach by 1,000 feet in this situation. Yet they continued. And I don't know. I just wish they hadn't. All right, I'm gonna conclude this video with one of my very favorite short little clips here. So watch this.
Sigma 15 Kilo Heavy, Roger, 7 miles from Zalpo, clear ILS runway 22 left approach.
Okay, copy ILS 22 left, please, 15 Kilo.
Rushell 1 Alpha Juliet Heavy, turn left heading 280, maintain 2000.
280, maintain 2000, Rushell 1 Alpha Juliet.
Endeavor F5192, turn left heading 340, descend maintain 3000.
340, descend maintain 3000, there, 5192. Final Virgin 45, Whiskey, descending 5000.
Virgin 45 Whiskey Heavy, heading 310, maintain 4000.
Heading 310, maintain 4000, Virgin 45 Whiskey.
Speedbird 15 kilo heavy, speed 180 or greater till 5 DME.
I can't do that, Mom. It'll be 160 or greater till 5.
Okay, you gotta give me more than 160 from now though, so when are you gonna flow to 160?
Yeah, I get that, Mom, but I am flying a 747 and I have stabilized approach criteria which I must maintain.
Okay, and you still haven't answered my question, so whenever you get around to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, okay, I'm reducing now to 160 knots.
Alright, approach clearance canceled, time left heading 130.
Okay, approach cancel, turn left heading this, please.
130.
130, the reason for that is?
I just need you to maintain 160 for at least 3 more miles.
Is that for traffic behind us, Mom?
Yes.
Okay, I'm ahead of them, and I don't believe that's the FAA approved procedure, but we'll discuss that later.
Kudos to these British Airways pilots. They could not be deterred from their stabilized approach. I'm telling you, I'm sure the last thing they wanted was to go around, and I think it was unfair, and I think the controller was wrong. But you know what? These guys, they weren't going to be swayed. They did the go around, and they circled back, they came in, they landed. They probably went to the pub that night, had a beer, and you know, they dealt with it afterwards. But they stuck to their SOP, and they did a great job. Good job, boys. All right, everybody, have a great day. Bye-bye.